Maren Kessler had worked at Riverside Trauma Center for almost 3 years, and in that time, nobody could say they truly knew her. She arrived early, left late, and spoke only when necessary. Her coworkers respected her calm hands and sharp eyes, but they often wondered why someone so skilled seemed to hide in the background. She was 34 years old, with short brown hair always tied back and a quiet way of moving through the hospital halls, as if she were trying not to be noticed. The younger nurses sometimes joked that she was too serious, but the older staff knew better than to underestimate her. There was something about the way she handled emergencies, steady, unshaken, almost too composed, that made people pause, even if they never asked why. Maren ate lunch alone in the break room, usually with a book she never seemed to actually read. She smiled politely when spoken to, but never offered much about her life outside work. No one knew where she came from before Riverside, no one knew what she had done before nursing, and Maren preferred it that way. It was a quiet Tuesday night when everything changed. The emergency room had been unusually calm for hours. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and the overhead lights hummed with their usual low buzz. Maren was restocking supplies when the doors burst open, and paramedics rushed in with a man on a stretcher. Male, late 30s, collapsed during a private training session. One paramedic called out, "Blood pressure dropping fast, irregular heartbeat. We thought it was exhaustion, but something's wrong." The man on the stretcher was tall, muscular, and clearly fit, the kind of patient who looked like he should never be in this position. His skin had turned pale, and sweat covered his forehead despite the cool air of the hospital. His name, according to his identification, was Daniel Reyes. What the intake sheet did not mention, because he had never disclosed it publicly, was that Daniel was a former Navy SEAL, now working as a private security contractor. The attending physician, Dr. Alan Whitfield, rushed over to assess him, but before he could finish his initial checks, another emergency call came through. A car accident victim was being rushed in from a separate entrance, and Dr. Whitfield was needed immediately. "Kessler, stay with him," Dr. Whitfield said, already moving toward the other patient. "I'll be back as soon as I can." For a moment, Maren stood alone with Daniel, monitoring his vital signs as they continued to drop. His heart rate was erratic, spiking and falling in a pattern that didn't match simple exhaustion or dehydration. Most nurses would have followed standard exhaustion protocol, cooling him down and administering fluids. But Maren's eyes narrowed as she studied the monitor. She had seen this pattern before, not in a textbook, and not in nursing school. She had seen it in the field. Her hands moved with sudden precision, adjusting the IV line and calling for a specific medication that wasn't part of the usual emergency room checklist. When a junior nurse hesitated, unsure why she wasn't following standard procedure, Maren's voice turned firm and clear, almost commanding. "Trust me. Get me 0.5 milligrams, now." The nurse obeyed instantly, startled by the sudden authority in Maren's tone. It wasn't panic, it was control, the kind of control that came from experience far beyond hospital walls. Maren adjusted Daniel's position, elevating his legs slightly, and applying pressure to a specific point near his collarbone, something no standard training manual would have suggested. She spoke to him steadily, her voice calm despite the tension in the room. "Stay with me, Daniel. You're not done yet." Within moments, his heart rate began to stabilize. The dangerous spikes flattened into a more even rhythm. Color slowly returned to his face. By the time Dr. Whitfield rushed back into the room, Daniel Reyes was breathing steadily, his vital signs holding strong. Dr. Whitfield stopped in the doorway, stunned. He had seen many nurses handle emergencies well, but what he had just walked into was different. The technique Maren had used wasn't something taught in any nursing program he knew of. It was precise, unconventional, and clearly born from real experience, the kind gained in high-pressure situations far beyond a hospital. "What did you just do?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and admiration. Maren didn't answer right away. She simply finished checking Daniel's vitals one more time, her expression unreadable. "He's stable," she said quietly. "That's what matters." Word of the incident spread quickly through the hospital, as these things always do. Nurses whispered about the calm woman who had somehow known exactly what to do when no one else did. Doctors reviewed the incident report, trying to understand the specific technique she had used. It didn't match anything in standard medical training. Administration, following procedure, pulled Marin's personnel file for review, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. What they found surprised everyone. Before working at Riverside, Marin Kessler had served as a combat medic, attached to special operations units overseas. Her file mentioned commendations for actions during high-risk missions, though the specific details remained classified. She had never mentioned any of this on her hospital application, listing only her nursing degree and basic certifications. The revelation spread through the hospital like wildfire, though Marin remained composed through it all, continuing her shifts as if nothing had changed. She didn't offer explanations, and most of her coworkers were too respectful, or too intimidated, to ask directly. 2 days later, Daniel Reyes regained enough strength to have a proper conversation. When Marin came to check on him during her rounds, he studied her carefully, as if trying to place a memory. "You moved like someone who's done this before," he said slowly. "Not hospital before, something else." Marin said nothing, adjusting his monitor instead. Daniel continued, his voice quieter now. "The way you positioned me, the point you pressed, that's not a hospital technique. That's field medicine, combat medicine." Marin's hands paused for just a moment before continuing her work. "Were you at Kandahar in 2014? Daniel asked directly. The room went silent. Marin looked up at him, and for the first time since anyone at Riverside had known her, something shifted in her expression, a flicker of memory, pain, and recognition all at once. "I don't talk about that," she said quietly. "I understand," Daniel replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I really do. I was there too, in a different unit, different mission, but I know that look. I've seen it in the mirror." Marin sat down slowly in the chair beside his bed, something she rarely did during rounds. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet shared by two people who understood something words couldn't easily explain. "I lost people," Marin finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People I couldn't save, no matter what I did. I was good at my job, but sometimes good isn't enough." She paused, staring at her hands. "After that mission, I couldn't stay in that world anymore. I needed something quieter, something where I could still help people, but without all of that." Daniel nodded slowly. "So, you became a nurse." "I became a nurse," she confirmed. "Somewhere no one would ask questions. Somewhere I could just be Marin, not whoever I was before." "But you're still that person," Daniel said gently, "whether you want to be or not. That's who saved my life 2 nights ago." Marin looked at him, her eyes glassy but steady. "I didn't want to be a hero twice. Once was enough. Once was more than enough." Daniel reached over, his hand resting briefly on her arm. "Some things don't leave us, no matter how far we run. And maybe that's not always a bad thing." Over the following weeks, as Daniel continued his recovery, word of Marin's true background settled into something the hospital staff quietly respected rather than gossiped about. Nobody pushed her for details she didn't want to share. Instead, they simply began treating her differently, not with pity or excessive curiosity, but with a deeper kind of respect. Dr. Whitfield, in particular, found himself reconsidering how the hospital utilized her skills. During a quiet conversation in his office, he brought up the incident again. "You saved his life using instincts and training this hospital didn't even know you had," he said. "I've been thinking about your role here. I'd like to recommend you for a new position, lead trauma responder. It would mean more responsibility, but also more trust in your judgment during critical situations." Marin considered the offer carefully. Part of her wanted to remain in the background, to continue her quiet life away from recognition, but another part of her, the part that had once run toward danger instead of away from it, understood that hiding her skills didn't erase them. It simply limited how much good she could do. "I'll take it," she said finally, "but I don't want special treatment. I don't want people making a big deal out of what happened." Dr. Whitfield nodded, respecting her wish. "Understood. Just doing your job then." "Just doing my job," she agreed. Word of her promotion spread quietly, without fanfare. She continued arriving early and leaving late, still eating her lunch alone in the break room, though now a few more colleagues occasionally joined her, sensing there was much they could learn from her steady presence. Weeks later, Daniel Reyes returned to Riverside, not as a patient, but as a visitor. He found Marin during a rare, quiet moment in the hospital hallway, dressed in casual clothes instead of a hospital gown, looking healthier and stronger than she had ever seen him. "I wanted to properly thank you," he said, holding out a small gift, a simple wooden box, handmade, engraved with a small emblem she recognized immediately from her past service. She opened it carefully, finding a small metal insignia inside, one that matched a symbol from her old unit. "I had a friend of mine make this," Daniel explained. "I know you probably don't want a big reminder of your past, but I wanted you to have something recognizing what you did, not just for me, for everyone you've helped, in both lives you've lived." Marin held the small insignia gently, feeling a wave of emotions she hadn't expected. Grief, pride, closure. It wasn't a symbol of pain anymore. It felt more like an acknowledgement that everything she had done, all of it, had mattered. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion she rarely allowed herself to show. Daniel smiled, understanding completely, without needing further words. "Take care of yourself, Marin. And thank you again, truly." As he walked away, Marin stood quietly in the hallway, holding the small box in her hands. She thought about her years of silence, the walls she had built around her past, and the quiet fear that if people knew who she really was, everything would change. But it hadn't changed in the way she feared. If anything, it had brought her closer to who she truly was, someone capable of extraordinary things, yet still humble enough to want an ordinary life. She placed the small insignia in her pocket, a quiet reminder, rather than a burden, and returned to her rounds, ready for whatever came next. From that night onward, the hospital staff still saw Marin as calm, composed, and unassuming, but now, there was an unspoken respect that followed her through every hallway and every shift. She hadn't set out to be a hero. She had simply done what she always did, helped when help was needed most. And in the end, that was more than enough.